The federal government is finally sharing its plan to address abuse in sports. It's not the public inquiry that some have been calling for. Instead, it will be a three-person panel modeled after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that will hear from Canadian athletes and ultimately make recommendations to tackle the problem.
We have to talk about racism, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia. We have to talk about the negative, inappropriate, and dangerous behavior that's been normalized and even perpetuated by sport culture that is toxic and makes sport unsafe.
Joining us now is the Minister for Sport and Physical Activity, Carla Qualtrough. Minister, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you've announced a wide range of initiatives here to address issues of abuse in sport. And really chief among them is this three-person commission modeled and informed by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What does that say about how deeply you feel sports in Canada has been shaped by abuse?
Well, I hope it sends a clear signal to Canadians and to the sports system that I think we need fundamental change and reform within the Canadian sports system. With the ecosystem, we need culture change. We need to own the fact that we haven't sufficiently protected our kids, and that there's a normalized pattern of behavior that's completely unacceptable.
Normalized pattern of behavior, how would you define that? How would you describe that?
Well, think of the things that happen every day in our rinks, on our courts, on our fields, in the stands, whether it's, jeering or intimidation or mockery or just the language that is used in sport can be really, really harmful. And in a lot of cases, it's completely acceptable in sport in a way that it would never be acceptable in other aspects of society. Like, could you imagine in a school, for example, an adult talking to a kid the way that some adults yell at children when they're playing sport?
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, you talk about the need to embed principles of human rights into the everyday practice of sports. How has that been lacking? How has that led to what we've seen in sports so far?
Well, I think historically in sport, we have always spoken about the values of sport, equity, fairness, inclusion, but we've not linked it enough to kind of human rights obligations. So a duty to protect our kids, a duty to provide an environment free from discrimination, and definitely not given people who have been harmed a recourse, so an avenue to seek justice for having been wronged. I mean, that's what a human rights approach is about. It's really just talking about the system in a way, when you think of all the issues, even beyond safe sport, you think of pay equity, you think of trans inclusion in sport, all the issues that are really pressing the system right now, they're all human rights issues.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, you say that essentially that all sports still struggle with homophobia, with misogyny, transphobia. Can you build upon that?
Well, I mean, I'm a product of the sports system, and I have a disability, and there were definitely times in my journey in sport where I didn't feel like I fit into the system or I felt excluded. And I had success in sport, and I know that so many people, so many kids in particular, can't find a place in sport, and sport can offer them so much if we could find a place for them. And so whether a kid is gay or trans, whether a kid is black or otherwise racialized, low income, there are real barriers and real attitudinal barriers to participation in sport that exist. And, I'm the biggest fan of sport, and I think that if we could figure this out and unlock the potential, the good in sport, our country would be so much stronger.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, though, and you know this, abuse survivors, your predecessor, Minister St. Onge, they were actually calling for a public inquiry on this issue. That's not what you're pursuing here. Why not?
Really good question, and I can tell you I dug really deeply into a number of pre-existing inquiries and commissions and just processes that have unfolded throughout Canadian history. And, in particular, the Dublin Inquiry, which was a public inquiry on anti-doping, or doping, I guess is a better way of putting it. The Romano Commission, which was a public inquiry on the state of health in our country. And then, of course, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And looking at all those models and understanding where we are on the journey of safe sport, sport. I landed on the TRC model because it has that strong element of trauma-informed, victim-centered, safe space. And it too started from a place where we know bad things happened to vulnerable populations because systems didn't protect them. And that's where we are in sport.
Mm-hmm. So not an inquiry, instead you have this commission. How do you see this commission coming together? How quickly do you see this commission essentially getting its work done?
Yeah, so we will be appointing the commission members early in the new year, and then that sets the ball rolling. So they will immediately get to work over this 18 months that we envision them doing public engagements, activities, meeting with, looking at systemic issues and kind of talking to the system, but also looking outside of sport for answers and solutions and advice and perspectives. Sometimes we in sport have tended to get quite insular. And I was really intentional in wording the terms of reference to allow us to draw on the expertise of outside and more independent voices. So during that 18 months, they're going to have engagements, which is basically hearings or other activities, in camera, in public, online, and then produce a preliminary report and host a national summit, and then ultimately produce a final report to the Government of Canada.
Okay. Minister Carla Qualtrough, I really appreciate the time. Thank you for speaking to us about this.
Nice to speak to you. Thank you.